I'm the first talk for today. So thank you very much for spending your lunchtime with us. My topic of conversation today is around Scrum and developers. So the agenda I'm covering today is we'll be talking about Agile versus Waterfall project management, and secondly, to do with Agile methodologies, and thirdly, to do more with Scrum using Scrum in practice, which is a type of Agile methodology. So let's begin. So Agile versus Waterfall. So I think I want to be more of a topic of conversation. I'm just going to put my screen here. What do you think Agile is? So if you can type it in the message box and I can just read through what people have written. So what do you think Agile is when it comes, sorry, what Waterfall is when it comes to project management? I'll just wait for a few secs. If not, don't worry, I can also run through it. Okay, I think Amy has written something. Specific steps needing to be completed before you can move on to the next. That would be correct. Yep, Isaac also mentioned that one at a time. Yep, so I think everyone's saying you have to do one thing after another. I think that's the main message behind that. So, okay, if we talk about so if I go back to my slide, minimize this. So yeah, so waterfall is typically has 5 different stages. So in a project, you'll go through requirements gathering. So looking at maybe if you have an existing project, you gather requirements from the client so that it can all be written down. Then you might go through a stage of design. So moving the requirements to a design phase, maybe using a UX designer to just lay it all out for you. And then the implementation is the third stage. So this is all about maybe using, developers to, I guess, put your designs into real life, into code. And then the fourth one around verification. So every time you complete a piece of code, it needs to be validated with the client, just to ensure it meets the requirements. And then lastly, in any project is maintenance. So after the project is near completion, you have to start thinking, well, okay, how do we actually make sure it runs smoothly over a period of time? And yes, so a lot of people mentioned that the process takes place sequentially, one after another. Um, yeah, so some of the advantages, yep, so you can actually have a clear project structure. You can actually set the costs. It's easier for tracking. I'm not going to go through everything, but you would tend to have a very comprehensive project documentation. I've seen like in the past when I worked, maybe, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years ago, where I saw this like a thick textbook for one of the products that they were trying to build. So that's something that you get out of that. Um, it does improve risk management because you know what you're trying to build up front. There is enhanced responsibility and accountability, I guess so, to a certain extent. And yes, more precise execution for non-expert workforce. Fewer delays because of additional requirements. So often you already know what you're building. You don't have stuff being added on later on. However, it does take longer um, because you won't be able to launch. You're just waiting for the whole thing to finish. That means, it could be 1, 2 years by the time you finish, which isn't great because that means the market requirements might have moved on and you've lost out, especially with the rise of AI. Everything just seems to expire very quickly. Um, yep, so there's limited flexibility for innovation. You really define your requirements and you're not going to change that. So yeah, there's no room for when things move on. Yeah, and often you get for the third point, often you get the feedback from client much later on, which isn't great because then you don't know whether you got it right or wrong. And during that period, you might have actually a lot of change requests, and that means that actually you'll be adding a lot more later on, which isn't great. And the last one around deadline creep. So I haven't seen one project in my lifetime run on time. I've been telling everyone yesterday, but I'm working 12, 14 hours because, and also this weekend. That's because deadlines are never, adhered to, I would say. Okay, so now we talked about waterfall. We're going to talk about agile. So what do you think agile is? I think Tamara has mentioned something about agile already. So agile, a set of practices that you iterate as you build. So that would be right. Anyone else got different definition of agile? I'll just give you a few minutes for you type away, and then I'll move on to the slide. And if you can mention like maybe the advantages, disadvantages of agile. Yeah, that would be right. Yep. Agile being flexible. Okay, I think I'll move on to slide, but keep it coming while I go through the slide, only because we're kind of short on time today. Um, yeah, so smaller chunks of work would be a good one. Feel like you're not, taking the whole thing on board. Okay, so agile project management. So an agile project divides work into phases, emphasizes, let's do that in English, uh, emphasizing continuous delivery and improvement. A bit like in the old days, where if you ever learn about how Japanese people build their manufacturing plants, everything is like continuously um, like just in time, that sort of methodologies. So we're constantly, building and releasing. So you're not waiting such a long time to before it goes into market. So, yep, so you have faster feedback cycles from the client, particularly, so you know that you're building the thing right. You're able to identify problems early. Yep, so that's related to the feedback. Um, and yes, that relates to getting higher customer satisfaction just from sorting those problems out as early as possible. And I mentioned earlier that the time to market is dramatically improved. So don't ship all in one go, just ship as you go along. Um, and yes, so you have also better visibility and accountability at a team level.
Mhm.
Yes, and I think Amy mentioned there's less documentation. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think it really depends on how you work, I would say. If you're doing consultancy work, we do have very heavy documentation only because we need to show for the budget that we have for a particular project, we need to show the progress that we're making. So we do quite heavy documentation. But if you work in a normal corporate environment, um, I think there'll be less documentation. Okay, and then yeah, so dedicated teams drive better productivity only because of the way where you work. You actually have something that we'll go on to talk about. It's about retrospective. So you talk about, oh, how can I improve on this process every so often? So you talk about this and you drive improvements through those discussions. And the last advantage is flexible prioritization. So yeah, so things do change. It's never static. So you have to reprioritize just because something might come up that you didn't realize was going to happen. And this sort of thing happens all the time. Let's move on to some disadvantages. Um, so critical path and inter-project dependencies may not be clearly defined as in waterfall. So um, I agree and disagree on that one. It depends how you run your project. I think if you have a very good project manager who is able to link everything together, you would find that whether it's agile or waterfall, it actually doesn't matter. But yeah, you need to have a really strong project manager who understands tech well. Um, the second point is around there's an organizational learning curve cost. So yes, it does take a little bit longer to, correct your mistakes, but it's good in a way because you're learning along the way and you're resolving those issues. And then the last point is true agile execution with continuous deployment pipeline has many technical dependencies and engineering costs to establish. Yeah, so it's never quite, y yes, you can be agile, but you need to have very good team to be pure agile, I would say. So this is something that you know, just to go back to reality. So in the past, a lot of people use that waterfall project management sort of way of working, but more and more we're working towards more agile. And to be honest with you, in our current customer that I work with, we're actually using a combination of agile. It's waterfall and agile. So we use agile practices, but actually the actual release to the product release to the users, it's actually right at the end. So it's sort of waterfall at the same time. Only because what we're building is not for a normal consumer. If it's a business to consumer product, it's good to have that feedback quickly. Like if you own Netflix, if you own, I don't know, Next or Airbnb, where you have a much bigger audience, it's good to work in an agile manner. But if we're doing some sort of business to business type projects, we tend to have a more agile approach. So yeah, so it's not straightforward. It's very project dependent. Now, if we do a deeper dive into agile, so there's different types of agile methodologies. I'm just going to focus on one, just because it's probably more popular than others. But there's things like for Scrum and Kanban, and I'm going to be focusing on Scrum for today. And we're going to do a practical exercise towards the end, so there'll be a lot of more interaction at the end. So Scrum, Scrum is a way of getting things done in a, agile sort of manner. And this is a typical Scrum way of working. So let's start off with this whole Scrum process. So you have a product goal. So what is the goal for this particular project? Is it to, I don't know, in my case, is to rebuild an existing application. So that could be your goal. And what you have with this product goal is, well, what sort of items do you need in order to achieve that goal? So you could have, I don't know, so like for example, we need to redo our user management side because it's rather old school. We have things like, set up a memorable word, which is very old school. So we're using a more modern tech stack for that. We Another thing could be around, thinking about what we're doing. Um, we have an old tech stack which is built in C sharp. So we're going to move to more modern technologies. So there's a lot in there, which you need to define as a team. And this creates that product backlog. So all the things that you need to create in order to achieve that product goal. And once you have that big chunk. It doesn't mean that it's going to be like static. It might change over a period of time. Oh no, also because you discover new things along the way. So at least you have a first stab at the product backlog. That's the main thing. And this is when we actually start doing the sprint. So again, if does anyone know what actually a sprint is? Maybe I'll just have a couple of minutes. Do you know what a sprint is before we get into the whole sprint process? Yep, yep. So Isaac, I know because I know Isaac very well. So yeah, it is a work period. So a sprint is how you define, first of all, like a sprint could be 2 weeks or it could be a month, but typically in all the projects I work for, it's always 2 weeks. And within a sprint, you go through a different set of, stages in order to get things done, right? So a sprint goal could be, okay, complete the complete the screens for user management could be a goal, or create a dashboard for all our users could be another. So you as a team will define what a sprint goal is. Yeah, so I think Richard, you first to say, yeah, a block of time for work to be done. Yeah, that would be all right. Um, yeah, so Pretcher, if I pronounce that correctly, yep, so we're going to be looking into using Jira or Trello. I'm actually going to be using Jira. Trello is a little bit more basic, I would say. In the corporate world, we tend to use Jira. Um, but what I'm showing you might not, they might not give you everything. But I'll explain that later. So yeah, once you've defined that sprint goal, you would have bring a list of items into that. So you have a discussion. So sprint planning, you have a discussion about, okay, what backlog items am I bringing into this particular sprint in order to achieve my goal? So that's what you're going to be doing. And then once you move that into the sprint goal, you will have a list of items. So a list of items could be, I don't know, uh, have a list of users that we need to import. Um, Set up, in this case, we're using Microsoft Entra ID for our user management. Um, or that could be a list of other things depending on what the requirements are. And then you go into this bit. So once you have the sprint backlog, this is the team that's actually implementing that sprint backlog. So typically within a Scrum team, you would have the product owner. PO stands for product owner. And I've seen one of the best product owners I've seen within my experience is when they have the domain expertise. So it's good to have a product owner who knows what they're talking about, who knows the product inside out. It's very hard to understand a domain if you don't have direct experience. I say this myself because I used to be a senior product manager in my previous company, and we were trying to redevelop a agricultural product, but I'm not a farmer. So I'm having to, because I'm not a farmer, I'm having to go out to domain experts to talk about farming. And I actually visited a farm. So, but it's still going to be hard to relate because you're like a third party. You're not really, you know, you're not in there day in, day out. So, yeah, one of the best ones I've seen is when they have that domain expertise and they're able to guide you day in, day out. Then you have a SM, which is a Scrum Master. So Scrum Master actually manages the whole process. And again, one of the best ones I've seen is when a Scrum Master's, I don't know, but I think it's a personality thing. Then they have that energy about them, because they need to, you know, push up the the team's energy, because after a while it can be quite laborious, I think. And then the main thing is where I sit in is the dev team. It's quite a loosey terminology, I would say. I would say a dev team could be, it's not pure devs really. You can have business analysts, you can have testers, you can have a UX designer in there, um, all sorts of things. But yeah, I think they just sort of bunch everyone up in as inside a dev team. And every day, so let's say our sprint is every 2 weeks. So every work day, we would have a daily scrum. And that typically lasts for 15 minutes where you discuss, okay, so this is what I've worked on yesterday, and what I've achieved, and then what I'm working on today, and if there's any blockers. So that's my typical sort of daily stand up that I would convey every day. In our current team, we actually have half an hour just because our project is so big, but typically it is 15 minutes, and you try to keep it short and sh sharp, so that you can get on with your actual work. Um, okay, so that's daily Scrum, and and then moving forward, so when they talk about increment, so every sprint is an increment. You're adding value to your product goal. So if we were to finish within 2 weeks, the user management sprint goal, we're actually already adding to our product goal. Next one could be around, oh, let's create a dashboard. That, and that's again you another sprint, and you'll be adding to that product goal. And eventually you'll complete that product goal if you have, I don't know, 10 sprints or something like that. So that's the idea. Um, and the definition of done. This one's very contentious. Um, so what is complete? Because everyone has different definition. So in my eyes, like if I was to have a ticket, a work ticket, which is I don't know, to do with create a component for button. For me, a definition of done would be, okay, uh, I've created the button. I have ensured that it's written with React and TypeScript. I have unit tested it. I've maybe used it in practice to make sure it's adheres to requirements. And another one could be adding it into my storybook. So yeah, it really depends. Each developer will need to have their own definition of done. Um, so once that sprint is near complete, and let's say it's 2 weeks, often you would have like a Thursday session where we do sprint reviews. So it's like a demo session. The demo session could be with the client or without the client. It really depends. It's not quite straightforward, but we would have each provide a demo of what we have completed for this sprint. And often, we'll share our screen, show off the function, tell them what ticket you worked on and what's the result of that. And then usually straight after the sprint review, we have a retro. So what is a retro? Often I can actually have a slide for this. So you have for the retro, what you should start, stop, and continue doing. And I think in the past it's been really helpful because then you can keep track of progress that you're making as a team. Um, and I think without a retro, sometimes, things are being swept under the carpet and you don't resolve it. So for me, a retro really helps. So I'm not going to go through the th inner 3 slides because I've actually talked it through this diagram, but you will have this deck after this call when Charlene and Aurora sends this out later on. But I actually want to focus on, Scrum in practice. So Isaac has touched on defining requirements as tickets and then grouping tickets into sprints. So that's what we're going to be running through today. So I think someone early on said, oh, we, use Jira and Trello. Trello's, yeah, much simpler version of Jira. And funny enough, Atlassian, who owns Jira and Trello, they bought Trello. But I think Jira is actually more suitable in a corporate environment. Now, I have set up Jira, so feel free. They do provide a free version. So let me go to just a generic. So Jira is owned by Atlassian, and they have different products, but Jira is the one you use for managing your work in a Scrum environment. So you can sign up for free. Um, so the one I know I've been testing this morning because it's a free version, you might not have everything. So actually, in my current project, we do have more extensive features. I realize some stuff is missing, so I'm just going to do the best I can. You won't have all the functionality, but it's good for today's session. So the first thing we're going to do is I am actually going to show you, we're going to use Airbnb as an example. So hopefully everyone knows Airbnb, but this is typically what it looks like. So I'm just gonna paste this link in the chat. So what we're gonna do is imagine that Airbnb decided to redesign their website, right? So let's say they just didn't like, I don't know, the pink color, they didn't like how the cards look, etc., etc. And they want to redevelop their whole application on the front end and back end. Um, so I have started off just because we had a discussion about component library yesterday evening. So I've created what we call epics. So within this timeline, you can create epics, which is like the top layer of what you might want to achieve, right? So this is part of your sort of product backlog. So within the component library, I can see that I need a heading, I need icons, I need logo, I need paragraphs, I need tabs. Now, the question is, if I was to continue this, what other components do you think I might need to build? So I've given you guys a starter for 10. So just type in the chat what other components I might need to build. Yep, so yep, navigation, yep, nav bar. So so within an epic, you have what you call user stories. That's the next layer down. So epics and user stories. And you can actually create, so if I type in, oops, component library, navigation, press enter, and it will automatically create a ticket. These are essentially tickets. So 1, 3, 6 sort of thing. And I'll move that to N, so it's alphabetical order. Yeah, this, yep, pagination, social links. So yeah, pagination would be a good one. Library, pagination. So another, let's put that here. What else is there? Yep, that's nice. Yeah, they got really nice cards, so we'll need to have that. I'm just looking at. So with social links, I think there will be a generic thing called links. Well, you can have actually separate social links, I guess, with an icon. That's possible, to be honest with you. Uh, cards. Okay, well, it can go on for a bit. Um, so yeah, I'm just gonna just add a few. And so you have component library. Now, I want you guys next to define another epic. So we talked about component library as an epic. What other epics could there be when if you were to rebuild Airbnb? Yep, so you can have, I've seen some come through. So let me create an epic around, so account management. So account management, be one. Page layout, Isaac, I think that's a bit contentious because there's so many, sometimes it's not quite clear, but it could be. But I tend to put maybe page layout in a component library, I would say. And likewise with filters and search, you can actually have it within a part of the component library. Payment could be one, yeah. Yeah, we can have a payment. So it's not like it's not really a hard and fast rule. It's just well, I think when it comes to creating this sort of epics and user stories, it's more of an art, I would say. Do what's right for your business, I would say. Security. I have seen in the past where we have epics that's related to teams. So people started creating epics. Okay, so the web UI team will do this. The extract transform um, language team will do this. Um, the quality testers will do that. Please don't do that. I think it's not the right way to create to create epics. It should be more about functionality that you're building, and it should be more end to end, you know. So, especially like around things around account management. So the front end team will build this, the back end team will need to do this, and there might be an API in between, but really you should be doing things end to end. That's a better way of doing it. We shouldn't be working in silos, is what I'm trying to get at. Um, yeah, so if you have different teams have you have different teams, do they have their own Jira project? It depends. So depends what your squad looks like. So squad, you might have a really like mammoth product, and you might split your mammoth product into squads. So each squad will have their own Jira board, but really you should have someone at the top to actually which actually aligns all the sort of work together. Otherwise, we'll just go haywire. But in our project, we only have one Jira board for the different teams, you can say, which I mentioned earlier, which is the web UI team, the ETL team, the testers. We only have one Jira board. Um, I think I'm not sure what I was trying to do, but anyway, let's go back here. Okay, so this is we talked about epics, user stories, and I think that's about it really. You can define other things. So within a story, you might want to break this down a little bit further if you wanted to. There's other things like you can put tasks inside. You can add subtasks if you wanted to. Like you can split it into, I guess you can split it into, I don't know, um, create a heading. You can adds up. You can add other things like create heading user story, create a story for your storybook stuff. You can create another one for a heading unit test. So again, it's not really it's more of an art. Some people don't need all this just because they don't need to think it. It's just stand for me. Like I wouldn't personally write tasks myself because I know what I need to do. So it really depends. If you have junior staff like apprentices, which I had in the past, I would definitely break down the stories for them, just because I don't want them to be overwhelmed. I just want them to concentrate one little thing at a time. But if you're a more competent developer, you don't need all these like subtasks. You just know what to do. Um, I think Ella, you had a question around in Agile, do developers tend to work across more than one product at a time? Yes, so I have a team member, a new joiner actually. He's actually doing two products at the same time, but it's only because we're really tight for time. But it does get confusing because you're context switching. So ideally, you should have one developer per product. Well, not one developer should only really work on one project at a time because otherwise it's very confusing, I find. But yeah, again, it depends. Um, okay, let's close this. Okay, so now that you've defined what you need, you will see inside Jira, you have all the backlog of items, which we discussed about, right? Oh dear. Um, okay, so I haven't created any user stories for the other epics, but I did have, some for the component library epic. So it will sit in here. So then we go through that phase. So we define we have the backlog, and it will be thousands of tickets in this case when it comes to Airbnb, but we just have this handful for the moment. So I'm just conscious of time. Um, so what you do is, next thing you do is you actually move it. So decide on what's happening for your sprint goal. Maybe the sprint goal could be complete, I don't know, um, three out of the, how many do we have? 10 or so. No, not 10, 8. Complete three out of the 8 component libraries could be a sprint goal for someone. So then you will move this into the sprint. I'm just going to take whatever, it doesn't matter in this case. So that's your sprint goal. Maybe as a front-end developer, heading, icons, logo. There will be others, obviously, depending on the team. And then once you have that, so pretend this is actually a sprint. So as I said, mentioned earlier, this is a free version. So I can't actually create more sprints. There's only one sprint ever. But in reality, you will have sprint 1, sprint 2 with all the dates. And you can actually start to slot out. Actually, you can actually manage your sprints 2, 3 weeks ahead. No, not 2, 3. 2, 3 sprints ahead, so that you know what's coming up. And if someone is quicker, you can actually bring something from sprint 2 into sprint 1, for example. So that happens sometimes. And then once you have that in your board, you can see now we're actually starting. So typically in reality, I will have this ticket, and let's say you have 2 front-end developers in your team. So often you have the choice if you want to work on heading. So I would just go, okay, well, I actually want to work on heading. So I'll assign this to myself. And then if there's another team member, they will, put themselves in here as well. And I'll take this ticket. I'll go, okay, well, I'm going to start on this ticket. So it's in progress. And once I've completed that ticket, it will go into review. And that's when you use, in review really means, uh, uh, okay, sorry, I'm just stopping here. In review really means, okay, so I've done my coding for this ticket, and I'm going to actually get my senior dev or even your peer reviewer to actually look through my code in GitHub, GitLab, whatever repository that you're using, have a look, and then they would, um, you know, approve or make comments. And once you go through that sort of peer review process, you will move it into done. That's quite a typical way of doing it. And done could be also merging it into your master, particularly is merging it into like the master main branch of your repository. So you have it there and it's shared across the whole team. Um, Ella, I'm not sure what Microsoft Planner looks like, but so I can't make much comment on that. Um, and then Richard, you mentioned how did you move items into a sprint? Um, so yeah, just going back to here. So you're in the backlog and you're just moving that inside, just drag and drop into the board. That's about it, really. Okay, that's all the questions. Um, and yeah, I think that's just a typical process that we go through at work. I don't want to really talk about the whole CI/CD pipeline, but there's a lot more to it. Um, yeah, but that's pretty much it what I wanted to cover for today. So hopefully you get a view of what is Agile versus Waterfall. What are the different sort of Agile methodologies? In this case, we're prioritizing Scrum and how actually Scrum looks in practice. So if you ever do get into a job, this is quite a typical process. Um, and if you want to be a Scrum Master, which is one of the roles within a Scrum team, you would help to manage this board. Yep, so you have also Kanban, which looks very similar to Scrum. Yeah, yep, so it's very good to use it in practice. You'll be well on the way if you know how to use it, I'll say, and it's not difficult to pick up. But if you do, there are some Scrum certifications which you can take, but it costs money. Um, Usually it's through this organization, through this organization, but I wouldn't pay 2 grand for the training, I would say. If you can get it through work, I think that would be great.